New England colonies and the Puritan culture. Yesterday we watched an edited version of Monumental. Gave you a really good history of what it took for them to get here. Now we're going to take a look at how their culture developed once they got here. So we're going to take a look at Massachusetts colony, and in particular, the way they spoke. How did they develop their accents? Well, East Anglia, country people still speak in a harsh, high-pitched, nasally accent referred to in a derogatory way as the Norfolk whine. During the Puritan Great Migration, the Norfolk whine was mixed with other derivatives into a new regional accent called the Yankee twang. The Yankee twang. New England dialect is very distinctive. It has its own vocabulary, idiom, and grammar. The New England speechways was mostly known for the way it sounded its words out. It's very different. Even different from those from the Irish, the Celtic, and the Cavalier culture down in the South. It's what is referred to as a whine in the way I'm going to show you. We're going to play a video of that sound, what it sounds like with somebody talking. Boston and from New England. It is, sorry, that's not idiot, ladies and gentlemen. That is idiom. That T should be an M. Sorry. I'm not sure if my Mac thought I was spelling that, because we don't usually use the word idiom. We usually just say dialect. Or you just use the word idiom. Maybe it thought that's what I was trying to, I don't know. So let's listen to some New England accents.
I'm going to spell a word. C-A-R. Yeah, all right. How about E-A-S-T-E-R? E-A-S-T-E-R.
Easter.
Easter.
That's not bad.
What else? That's enough. How about Y-A-R-D? D. Y-A-R-D.
Y-A-R-D. Yard. Yard.
Yard, yeah.
That's good. That's good.
All right, last one. G-A-R-D-E-N.
Garden.
Yeah.
A Boston accent. She's a news producer, lady, whatever, news broadcaster, whatever. Talking in front of the green screen.
You ready? Good evening, I'm Rebecca Green. We begin tonight with the hiring of a new health agent.
Yep. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
Good evening, I'm Rebecca Green. We begin tonight with the hiring of a new health agent. Did I get that wrong?
Nope. Perfect.
Woo!
And then
Initially?
initially.
Initially.
Incumbents.
Incumbents.
Yep.
Okay.
Now.
Okay.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
The rec department steps up its game when it comes to... Oh, what did I say?
Department.
Oh, okay, good.
That's right. And
Town Hall, within the grounds of Heritage Park.
heritage. Try again.
Heritage?
Heritage. Yes.
Okay. In the meantime, Carabetta told members that at this point he believes Carabetta. April 20th with a close matchup against Monsoon. The Spartans... Munson! Oh my God! HR department totaling... I totally... An HR department, start there or no? Oh, like start at the top. By March 25th. By March 25th. No, by March 25th. Oh my God. By March 25th.
By March 25th.
By March 25th.
Yeah.
And then 3 times out. Ooh.
Sorry.
Hour.
Hour.
What does it sound like?
Spending hour.
Ew. Gross.
Ready? We find out in 3, 2, 1.
We find out how the town is spending our tax dollars. The FY16 town budget is now drawn out into a detailed plan for the public to view. Whoa. I'm human resources position. Ooh, resources. I caught
She's
that.
trying to force herself to
Resources?
not talk in her accent.
Oh, Harold? Harold, not Harold. Harold. Harold Grinspoon. Harold. In. Try to like suck in. Can I put it to the side?
Yeah. Yeah. There. No,
Thank you. No? Oh, sorry.
Looks is everything in the news business.
So funny.
Did I miss something? No. Woo! An HR department totaling 100 department. Did I say it wrong again? Municipal?
2, 1.
Oh. I'm Rebecca Green.
And I'm Allie Carrington.
Until next time,
Oh,
good
yes,
night.
I did see that in the news.
A programming note, LCAT Sports kicks off once again for the spring season next week here on LCAT News Update. Until then, I'm Rebecca Green. Thanks for watching. Good night. Okay.
Yay!
And have to
My
hold
fault for everything.
When I'm out of New York, they know exactly where I'm from.
Coffee.
Water, mall, talk.
There isn't a typical Long Island accent, but there are some features that people associate with Long Island or some general, like New York area dialect.
Mall, mother, water,
One of them is a vowel, actually called the coffee vowel.
coffee.
Coffee.
This is, for some people, an aw. For some people, it's an ah. Like in my native dialect, it's an ah. But in New York, people say aw.
Coffee. That's an interesting one.
People notice that in coffee because it's a fairly common word, but it occurs in a lot of other words too.
Long Island people like to drink coffee, shop at the mall, walk their dog, and swim in the water.
A Long Islander is more likely to say all and small and caught. They kind of, instead of making it a pure vowel, just one sound, they'll turn it into a diphthong, into 2 sounds.
Long Island.
A lot of people who were raised in Brooklyn and Queens, or their grandparents were raised there, the progression to kind of find suburbia or find a house and a yard would be to move east. And so they'd come east, and with that, they would bring their sounds.
Everybody says I have a really thick Long Island accent. I don't hear it, but everybody else does.
The people that I know, and when I hear people from Brooklyn, or when I hear people from Queens, or when I hear people from parts of Long Island, they share if there are differences, they must be very minimal.
People from Brooklyn and the Bronx tended to settle just south of 25A, and people from elsewhere settled north of 25A as a general rule. And so 25A seemed to be the divider in the Three Village community among those who had the strong pronounced New York accents and those who didn't.
As far as actors go, when they know they want to lose a dialect, they know that's kind of a quintessential New Yorkism. They kind of dial it back a little bit. They know that that's one thing that maybe they can fix.
A couple of key words that I had to actually work on losing when I became involved in wrestling, because my character, Cactus Jack, was supposed to be Southwestern, and you could not have Cactus Jack wrestling in the South saying words like ball.
Long Island people like to drink coffee, shop at the mall, walk their dog, and swim in the water.
You know, there's nothing wrong with sounding like you're from anywhere, with sounding like you're from Long Island or Massachusetts or New Jersey. They're all wonderful sounds.
They look at you and go,
You're from New York, Long Island, aren't you?
All right, let's take a look at how they ran their families, how they established their family structure. Ladies and gentlemen, wait in. The Puritan family was just as distinctive as their speech ways. Puritans did not see the family as an end in itself, but as an instrument of their highest religious purpose. As Puritan writer Jonathan Mitchell explained, quote, "A Christian may and ought to desire many things as means, but God alone as his end," close quote. Historian Edmund Morgan described Puritan families as, quote, Puritan tribalism. This ideal comes from the Hebraic ideal that the founders of New England were God's chosen people. Their ministers encouraged the parents to think of themselves as quote, the saints, close quote, and to believe that grace should be descendant to their children. This was described by Pastor John Cotton in geological terms. The quote, "The covenant of God is, I will be thy God and the God of thy seed after thee," close quote. Pastor William Stroughton described it this way, quote, "The books that shall be opened at the last day will contain genealogies among them. They shall be brought forth a register of the genealogies of New England's sons and daughters," close quote. They really seen everything they do in a family for the purpose of bringing their kids into the covenant of God and into salvation. And they were fully expecting, when the names are read out in theological terms, the book of life at the end times, that their families would be listed. So it wasn't just New Englanders that were interested in their genealogy. Virginians too traced their roots, but for different reasons. While New England families traced their roots for moral and religious reasons, Virginians and the Cavaliers did it out of pride, social ranking, and quartering. Quartering is like bragging about the property that they have, bragging about how grandeur their house is. So both societies do worry about genealogy, but for completely different reasons. Puritans believed God's covenant with each individual Christian was enlarged into another sort of contract which they called the family covenant. The covenant family became a complex web of mutual obligations between the between the husband and wives, parents and children, and masters and servants. Yeah. It was the clarity of this contractual ideal, the rigor of its enforcement, and especially the urgency of its spiritual purpose that set New England Puritans apart from other people. Household compositions was much different than other colonial cultures. They had the largest number of children, with an average of 9.7 living per household in the 1730s. Puritan families had the least number of servants of all the regions in average. Let me rephrase this. In average, they had less than one servant per family. Huh? Small number of servants. That's what it should say. Not surprising, their high focus in family to see that they had the highest number of intact families in the colonial regions. So I didn't write that very well, but needless to say, with their their second devotion, first devotion was to God in the study of the Bible. Second devotion was to family. It's not surprising that they had the highest number of intact families. In other words, there was husband and wife in something like 98% of the homes or something.
Like, what would happen to the family members split up?
Whoops, hang on, I'll go back. What's that?
Like, so what would happen to the family that was like split up? Like,
Well, they hardly ever did. That's the point. Hardly ever.
what about the one that did? Like, what happened to them? Like,
Well, it depends. Typically, the kids would go with the dad. The wife would have to be. She'd have to move in with. We're going to find out here. No single person was allowed to live by themselves. So they were taken in by another family under that authority, and then either remarried if she was eligible to be remarried, and if he was eligible to remarry, then he remarried. All right. So something to think about here. In order to enforce the family expectations, select men, later they were called tithing men, were appointed by law to inspect families on a regular basis. If families were not running properly, the children and servants would be removed and sent to live with another family. A form of CPS. But what they were looking for was the man running the household the way they should be, biblically. If the woman's wearing the pants of the family, that's not running that house. If the kids are running amok, not being obedient, that's not running the house properly. It falls on the shoulders of the man to run his home the way they believe it should be ran. And if not, your family will be taken away. Yes, because that's not how the house is supposed to be ran. It's a patriarchal family. So the woman is to be subservient to the husband. Well, then it would be his fault. He would be losing his family because he's not performing his duties. So let's say he's lazy people did not last very long in this society. There wasn't really any such thing as a drunkard or a drug-using dad or husband or lazy, someone who wouldn't work. That just didn't exist in this culture. So those who naturally were that way did not last very long. So now, single people were not allowed to live alone and was placed with other families under the authority and protection of that father. Women especially had to be placed under the authority of a man, typically a man with a family. So you might be 30 years old. If you find yourself unmarried, you would be placed in another family where you would fall underneath the authority of that dad or that husband. And so let's say some other guy wanted to date you, or that time they didn't date, they courted, and wanted to go through the customs towards marriage. He had to go through him. You could not make that decision yourself. You were under the authority of a male household. Did not matter how old you were. Patriarchal families are quite often like that. Yeah. You often will also have to pay a dowry, so that, and depending on the family, it might cost you a lot in order to marry her, because that is like an insurance policy. You're saying you will not divorce her, and if you do, then she has to come back home, and he may not have the money to support her. So what you pay for her is what he's supposed to use to keep feeding her if she moves back. It's like an insurance policy. Let's take a look at how they seen marriage. Puritans, unlike others, were not quick to get married, and on average married 10 years or later than everyone else, basically 10 years after puberty. The average male entered into his first marriage at 26, whereas the female entered their first marriage when they're 23, on average. As opposed to like the Cavaliers, the Celts, the Virginians, who might be marrying 16, females at 16, maybe even 15, while the men are 18, 19, maybe 20. And then you have a big gap if they're not marrying at at that age, and then the men are much older. Puritans had the highest number of married people in all the colonies. 94% of women married and 98% of the men. In comparison, 27% of England's adult population were not married by the time they reached maturity. Women who did not marry by the time they were 30 were called thornbacks. And failure to marry, failure to find a suitable partner was seen as a sign of God's ill favor on you. So when you get the ideal, when you hear in literature, she's an old spinster, that's where that comes from. Marriage was not a religious ceremony, but a civil contract. The marriage was agreed, quote, agreed to, or, quote, executed, not performed or solemnized before a judge, not a pastor. Today, we often will go before somebody in the clergy and get married. That did not happen. They did not see this as a religious act, but as civil contract. If the terms of the contract was broken, the union could be ended by divorce. This marriage concept began with the Civil Marriage Act in 1653 in England. So again, it's not strictly Puritan ideals. This came from England. So a contract would be, you agree to cook my lunch, breakfast, and dinner, wash my clothes, bear me kids, however they say that. I promise to put a roof over your head, you won't go hungry, and you won't run around on me, those kind of things. And if she broke or he broke that contract, say didn't cook you meals, didn't have clean clothes for you, didn't sew, whatever it is in the contract, then he could sue for divorce. And one of the things that would make you ineligible for remarriage is adultery. So, how did they raise their children? Child-rearing customs were shaped by Puritan ideals and East Anglican experiences. Behind these practices lay an explicit assumption, deeply rooted in Calvinist theology, about the natural depravity of a newborn child. I often will ask in class, are people born evil or are they born good? Fundamentally, everybody answers this question, and depending on what you believed, shapes the rest of your worldview. Calvinists, which are for the most part Puritans, believe that human beings are born with nothing good about them. In fact, they have evil in them. That originates from the original sin committed by Adam. When Adam ate the fruit, he ushered this sin nature into human beings and brought in evil. Human beings could not do good at that point. That's why you need a Savior, and in the Christian world, that is Christ, to redeem your human nature so you are capable of doing both good and evil. But if Christ has saved you, the ideal is that you would not want to do evil, but you would seek to do good. Otherwise, you cannot do good. All you do is evil. So, as a consequence of Adam's sin in the garden, all infants were born sinners with nothing good about them. In other words, they would naturally do bad things if they were not taught otherwise. Moreover, the purpose of child rearing was what they called breaking the will. The process of breaking the will, which by the way is a test question, was achieved by Puritan households by strict and rigorous supervision. So, I think there's a matching question where it's going to ask you, identify which group of people exercise this kind of child rearing, breaking the will, bending the will, and you're going to identify who's who. There are accounts of Puritan children being kidnapped by natives and kept for years, and when they do get rescued and they come back, those who choose to come back said they wish they had it. Many choose to stay with the natives because they were allowed to play and they didn't have the strict discipline that the Puritans put on them. It's my understanding that they were very strict in the Puritan household. What does that look like? I don't know, but we do know by the accounts of those journals and diaries that it was, we would probably consider it abuse today, I would guess. So with some of the discipline and probably the little things that would get you switched. They do, that's very true. It was enough that many of these kids, of course kids naturally want to be told no. The reality is kids want to do what they want to do. Now they need boundaries, they actually like boundaries. You learn that when you get older, but they push against them. But boundaries do provide safety for them. But by and large, especially young kids, what do you see young kids do, toddlers do in Walmart? Throw a fit, right? When they don't get their way. Well, that is an example of the Puritans' ideal. You have to break that natural, selfish desire in that kid. Not allow it to continue. Puritan would be taking care of that in a heartbeat. They wouldn't care who was watching. Purpose of child rearing was referred to as breaking the will. The natural will of a human being, according to Calvinist theology, is that they are prone or desire to do evil things. Evil in the way it's being used is the absence of good. We're not necessarily evil as in murder. But they are selfish, they're narcissistic, they want to do what they want to do, not obey parents, not obey God, not obey anybody. Do what they want to do. So you have to break that desire, and that's referred to as breaking the will.